I still remember the first time I laid eyes on Clara. It was at a 4th of July BBQ at Sam's place, the sun setting over our small Ohio town, casting a golden hue on everything. Clara was there with her friend Megan, and they were the life of the party. She had this infectious laugh that drew everyone in, including me. I was just a construction worker with big dreams, but Clara made me feel like I could do anything. She was studying to be a nurse, and her passion for helping others was one of the things that drew me to her. We hit it off immediately. Our first date was at a local diner, where we talked until they closed. From there, things moved quickly. We moved in together after a year, into a small apartment downtown. Our life together was filled with late-night talks, lazy Sunday mornings, and a lot of love. Clara was my rock, and I thought I was hers. But over the past year, things started to change. It wasn't a sudden shift, more like a slow drift. Clara became more and more distant. She started working late more often, coming home exhausted and withdrawn. She spent a lot of time on her phone, always with an excuse ready when I asked about it. Our conversations, once deep and meaningful, turned into shallow exchanges about her day or what we needed from the grocery store. One night, as we sat on the couch watching TV, I couldn't take it anymore. "Clara, what's going on?" I asked, my voice breaking the silence. "You've been so distant lately." She looked up from her phone, her eyes tired and weary. "I'm just stressed, John. Work has been overwhelming." I wanted to believe her, but there was a coldness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. I tried to push the thought away, telling myself it was just work stress. But as the days turned into weeks, the distance between us grew wider. It was the little things that hurt the most. She stopped laughing at my jokes, her touch became rare and fleeting, and she no longer looked at me the way she used to. It felt like she was slipping away, and I was powerless to stop it. One Saturday, hoping to reignite the spark, I planned a special day for us. I cooked her favorite meal, lasagna, and set the table with candles and flowers. When she walked in, she barely glanced at the setup. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice flat. "I thought we could have a nice dinner together," I said, forcing a smile. "It's been a while." She sighed, rubbing her temples. "John, I'm really not in the mood. It's been a long day." I watched her walk away, my heart sinking. The dinner went untouched, and I spent the night on the couch, staring at the ceiling, wondering where we had gone wrong. The weeks that followed were no different. Clara was always busy, always tired, always somewhere else in her mind. I felt like a ghost in my own home, invisible and unwanted. Even Sam noticed the change in me. "Hey man, you okay?" he asked one evening as we worked on his old truck in his garage. "You've been looking pretty down lately." I shrugged, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's Clara. She's been distant. I don't know what to do." Sam nodded, concern etched on his face. "Maybe you guys just need to talk. Really talk. Sometimes life gets in the way, and you just need to reconnect." I wanted to believe it was that simple, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The nagging feeling that something was terribly wrong gnawed at me, keeping me up at night. One afternoon, I decided to surprise Clara at work. I thought maybe we could have lunch together, like we used to. But when I got to the hospital, her colleague told me she had taken the day off. She mentioned a personal appointment, she said casually. That was the tipping point. The doubts and suspicions that had been building up inside me finally exploded. I needed answers, but I didn't know where to start. Confronting Clara directly seemed too risky. If I was wrong, it could make things worse. I remembered an old friend from high school who had once mentioned a private investigator named Vince. He had helped her out of a tough spot, and she had praised his skills. Desperate for answers, I decided to give him a call. Vince agreed to meet me at a small, run-down diner on the edge of town. When I walked in, I immediately spotted him in a corner booth, nursing a cup of coffee. He was in his late 40s, with a scruffy beard and an air of no-nonsense about him. "So, you think your girl is cheating on you?" he asked bluntly after I sat down. I nodded, swallowing hard. "I don't know what to think. She's been distant, secretive. I need to know what's going on." Vince leaned back, studying me. "I can find out for you. But my methods aren't exactly by the book. If you want clean and simple, look elsewhere." I hesitated, but the need for answers outweighed my reservations. I just need to know the truth, Vince. Whatever it takes. He nodded, a faint smile on his lips. All right then, let's get to work. Vince began his investigation, using methods that were, to say the least, unconventional. He tracked Clara's movements, tapped into her phone records, and followed her on her days off. It wasn't pretty, and it made me feel uneasy, but I was desperate. As the days passed, the strain of not knowing took its toll. I became more withdrawn, isolating myself from friends and family. I started drinking more, taking risks that I normally wouldn't, anything to distract myself from the pain. My life felt like it was spiraling out of control. One evening, Vince called me. "I've got something," he said. "Meet me at the diner." I drove there, my heart pounding. When I arrived, Vince was already there, a folder in front of him. He slid it across the table, and I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were photos of Clara with another man, records of her secret therapy sessions, and notes about her struggles with addiction. It was all there, the truth laid bare. Clara wasn't just cheating. She was battling her own demons, struggling with an addiction and seeking help in secret. The betrayal cut deep, but so did the realization that she had been hiding her pain from me. I closed the folder and looked at Vince. "Thank you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "Take care of yourself, John. This is just the beginning." I left the diner that night with a heavy heart and a mind full of questions. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. I needed to confront Clara, not just about the affair, but about everything she had been hiding. Only then could I decide what to do next. The distance between us had grown into a chasm, but maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance to bridge it. Or perhaps it was time to find my own path, one that led away from the shadows of deceit and towards a new beginning. After Vince handed me that folder, I felt like my world had been turned upside down. All those late nights, the secretive phone calls, the unexplained absences, it all made sense now. But knowing the truth didn't bring the relief I thought it would. Instead, it left me with a gnawing emptiness and 1,000 questions. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't bring myself to confront Clara right away. Every time I looked at her, my mind raced with conflicting emotions: anger, sadness, confusion. She seemed oblivious to my turmoil, or maybe she was just good at hiding her own. Either way, our home felt like a minefield, and I was tiptoeing around every conversation. I decided to keep gathering more information. I needed to understand why Clara had turned to another man and what she was dealing with. Vince was relentless in his investigation, and though I felt guilty about spying on her, I justified it by telling myself that I needed the truth. One night, Clara came home later than usual. She looked exhausted, her eyes heavy with something I couldn't quite place. As she made her way to the bedroom, I followed her, trying to muster the courage to say something. "Clara, wait," I called, my voice catching in my throat. She turned, her expression a mix of irritation and concern. "What is it, John? I'm really tired." I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but instead, I took a deep breath. I miss you. It feels like we haven't really talked in ages." Her face softened for a moment, and she sighed. "I know.
I'm sorry, John.
Things have just been complicated." "Complicated how?" I pressed, my heart pounding. She shook her head, avoiding my gaze. "It's hard to explain. Just trust me, okay?" Trust. The word stung, considering everything I knew, but I nodded, swallowing my frustration. "Okay, I'm here if you need to talk." She gave me a weak smile and headed to bed, leaving me standing there, more confused than ever. I felt like I was living with a stranger. The next day, I met Vince at his cluttered office. It was filled with odd memorabilia, old cameras, newspaper clippings, and a desk piled high with files. Vince was hunched over his laptop, scrolling through what looked like surveillance footage. "Got something new for you," he said without looking up. "Clara's been meeting this guy regularly. He works at the same hospital. Name's Mark." I leaned over to look at the screen. There they were, Clara and Mark, sitting in a coffee shop, talking closely. My stomach churned. It wasn't just physical. There was an emotional connection between them. I could see it in the way she smiled at him, a smile that had been missing at home. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice tight. "Mark Evans. He's a doctor. Recently divorced. No kids. He's been seeing Clara for a while now, but it seems like more than just an affair. They talk a lot about her issues." "What issues?" I asked, fearing the answer. Vince handed me another folder. "She's dealing with a prescription drug addiction. It started as a way to cope with stress, but it spiraled out of control. She's been going to therapy and support groups, but she didn't want you to know." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Clara had always been so strong, so put together. I never imagined she could be struggling like this. And yet, she hadn't trusted me enough to let me in, to share her pain. Why didn't she tell me? I whispered, more to myself than to Vince. People hide things for all sorts of reasons. Shame, fear of judgment, wanting to protect their loved ones. "Could be any number of things," Vince said, his tone softer than usual. I nodded, trying to process it all. Clara was hurting, and instead of coming to me, she had turned to Mark. It hurt like hell, but I also felt a pang of sympathy. Maybe she thought she was protecting me, or maybe she didn't know how to ask for help. Over the next few days, I tried to act normal around Clara, but it was hard. Every time she smiled at me, I wondered if it was genuine or just a facade. I found myself analyzing every word, every gesture, looking for clues that I might have missed before. One evening, as we sat in uncomfortable silence, I decided to reach out to Sam. I needed someone to talk to, someone who knew me and could give me some perspective. We met at our usual spot, a dive bar near his garage. "So, what's been going on?" Sam asked, taking a sip of his beer. I took a deep breath and told him everything. About Clara's distance, my suspicions, hiring Vince, and what I had discovered. Sam listened quietly, his expression serious. "Man, that's tough. I can't believe she didn't tell you about the addiction. That's something you should face together." "I know," I said, my voice cracking. "But she didn't. She turned to someone else instead. Maybe she was scared, John. Scared of how you'd react. Scared of admitting she wasn't as strong as you thought. People do crazy things when they're scared." I nodded, knowing he was right. "What do I do now, Sam? How do I confront her without making things worse?" "You need to be honest, but also compassionate. Let her know you're hurt, but also that you're willing to help her through this. It's going to be messy, but if you love her, you have to try." I sighed, feeling the weight of his words. I do love her. I just don't know if I can get past this. "Take it one step at a time," Sam said, clapping me on the shoulder. "You'll figure it out." That night, I lay awake, thinking about what Sam had said. He was right. I needed to confront Clara, but with understanding and compassion. It wouldn't be easy, but I owed it to us to try. The next evening, I found Clara in the kitchen, preparing dinner. My heart raced as I approached her, trying to steady my nerves. "Clara, we need to talk," I said, my voice trembling. She turned to look at me, her eyes filled with apprehension. "What is it, John?" I took a deep breath, my chest tight with emotion. "I know about Mark. I know about your addiction, and I know you've been hiding it from me." Her face went pale, and she dropped the knife she was holding. How do you know?" "It doesn't matter how," I said gently. "What matters is that we need to face this together. I love you, Clara. I want to help you, but I can't do that if you keep shutting me out." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she sank into a chair. "I'm so sorry, John. I didn't want to burden you. I didn't know how to tell you." I knelt beside her, taking her hands in mine. "We're a team, remember? We're supposed to face things together, no matter how hard. You don't have to go through this alone." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I was so scared. Scared you'd leave me, scared of what you'd think of me." "I'm not leaving you," I said firmly, "but we need to be honest with each other. No more secrets." For the first time in months, Clara and I talked. Really talked. She told me about her addiction, how it started, and how ashamed she felt. I told her about my suspicions and how much her distance had hurt me. It was painful, but it was also a relief to finally get everything out in the open. By the end of the night, we were both emotionally drained, but there was a sense of hope. We had a long way to go, but we had taken the first step. As I lay in bed that night, holding Clara close, I knew the road ahead would be tough. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we might just make it through this together. The morning after our heart-to-heart, I woke up feeling a mix of exhaustion and relief. Clara was still asleep, her face serene in the early morning light. It had been a long time since I'd seen her look so peaceful. I gently kissed her forehead and got up, determined to start this day with a sense of purpose. Over breakfast, Clara seemed lighter, though the weight of our conversation still lingered in the air. We had a long road ahead, but at least we were facing it together. I made a silent promise to myself to be more attentive, more understanding. We had started to mend the cracks, but I knew it would take time to fully heal. As Clara left for work, I decided to visit Vince. There were still loose ends that needed tying up, and I wanted to get the full picture of everything that had been going on. Vince's office, as cluttered and chaotic as ever, felt strangely comforting now. He looked up from his desk, his eyes sharp and curious. "Back so soon?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. "Yeah," I replied, sitting down across from him. "Clara and I talked, but there's still more I need to know." Vince nodded, understanding. "I figured as much. I've got some new information for you." He handed me another folder, this one thicker than the last. As I opened it, my heart pounded. Inside were more detailed reports on Clara's meetings with Mark, her therapy sessions, and the support group she had been attending. There were notes on her struggle with addiction, details about the prescriptions she had been abusing, and the lengths she had gone to keep it all hidden. "What's this?" I asked, pointing to a series of receipts and transactions that seemed out of place. Vince leaned forward. "Those are payments she's been making to a private rehab clinic. It's not cheap, but it's one of the best. She's been trying to get clean, John. She's been fighting this battle on her own." I stared at the documents, my mind racing. Clara had been going through hell, and I hadn't even noticed. I felt a surge of guilt and sadness, but there was also a glimmer of hope. She had been trying to fix things, to make things right. Why didn't she tell me? I asked, more to myself than to Vince. "Shame, fear, guilt. Take your pick," Vince said. "Addiction is a tough road, and sometimes people feel like they have to walk it alone." I nodded, absorbing his words. "Thanks, Vince, for everything." "Don't mention it," he replied, a rare smile crossing his face. "Just make sure you two stick together through this. It's not going to be easy." I left his office feeling more determined than ever. Clara and I had a lot to work through, but knowing she had been trying to fight her addiction gave me a renewed sense of purpose. I spent the rest of the day making plans. I looked up information on addiction support, counseling options, and ways I could be there for her without overstepping. When Clara came home that evening, I was ready. We sat down and talked about what I had learned. She was initially hesitant, but as we went through the documents together, she began to open up even more. She told me about her darkest moments, the times she felt completely lost, and the small victories that had kept her going. "I wanted to protect you," she said, tears in her eyes. "I didn't want you to see me like this." "I'm your partner, Clara. We're supposed to share our burdens," I replied, holding her hand. "I'm here for you, no matter what." As the days turned into weeks, we slowly started to rebuild our relationship. We went to counseling together, joined a support group for partners of addicts, and made a point to communicate openly. It wasn't always easy. There were days when the weight of everything threatened to pull us under, but we kept pushing forward. One evening, after a particularly tough day at work, Clara suggested we go for a walk. It was something we hadn't done in a long time, and I welcomed the idea. We strolled through the park, the cool evening air refreshing and calming. "Do you remember our first date?" she asked, a soft smile on her lips. "Of course I do," I replied. "That little diner on Main Street. We talked until they closed." She nodded. "I miss those days, when everything was simpler." "We can get back there," I said, squeezing her hand. "It's going to take time, but we can do it." As we walked, I felt a renewed sense of connection. We talked about our hopes, our fears, and our dreams for the future. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were truly in sync. That night, as we lay in bed, I held Clara close. "We're going to get through this," I whispered. Together. She nodded, her head resting on my chest. Together. The next morning, I woke up early and made us breakfast. Clara joined me in the kitchen, a look of surprise on her face. "What's all this?" she asked. "Just a little something to start our day off right," I said, smiling. As we ate, I felt a sense of normalcy returning to our lives. We talked about our plans for the weekend, the little things we wanted to do together. It felt good, like we were slowly finding our way back to each other. In the following weeks, we continued to make progress. Clara's therapy sessions were helping, and the support group provided a safe space for her to share her struggles. I started attending meetings for partners of addicts, learning more about how to support her without enabling her addiction. One day, after a particularly insightful counseling session, Clara suggested we take a short trip out of town. "Just to get away for a bit," she said. "We could use a change of scenery." I agreed, and we planned a weekend getaway to a small cabin by the lake. It was the perfect escape, a chance to reconnect without the pressures of everyday life. We spent our days hiking, fishing, and simply enjoying each other's company. One evening, as we sat by the campfire, Clara looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and determination. "Thank you, John, for standing by me. I don't know where I'd be without you." I reached for her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "We're in this together, Clara. Always." As the fire crackled and the stars twinkled above us, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. We still had a long road ahead, but for the first time in a long time, I felt confident that we could navigate it together. Life wasn't perfect, and we would face more challenges, but we were stronger now. We had faced the darkness and found our way back to the light. And as long as we had each other, I knew we could overcome anything. Our weekend getaway was exactly what we needed. The peacefulness of the lake and the simplicity of our days together helped us reconnect. But as we drove back to town, I knew there was still more to uncover. Clara and I had made progress, but the shadow of her addiction and the affair with Mark lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that there were still pieces of the puzzle missing. Back at home, life started to settle into a new rhythm. Clara continued her therapy and support group sessions, and I found solace in attending meetings for partners of addicts. We were working on our relationship, but the need for closure gnawed at me. I had to understand everything, not just the addiction but also the affair. It was the only way I could fully move forward. I called Vince and arranged another meeting. His office was as chaotic as ever, filled with stacks of papers and old files. He greeted me with a nod, motioning for me to sit. "John, I've been digging deeper into Mark's background," Vince began, sliding a folder across the desk. "There's more to this guy than meets the eye." I opened the folder and scanned the contents. Mark Evans wasn't just a doctor. He was a man with a troubled past. There were records of a messy divorce, allegations of misconduct at his previous job, and whispers of inappropriate relationships with patients. The more I read, the more I realized that Mark had his own demons. Why would Clara get involved with someone like this? I asked, feeling a mix of anger and confusion. "People are drawn to others who mirror their own struggles," Vince said. "Sometimes, they think they can find understanding or escape in someone who's been through similar pain." It made sense, but it didn't make it any easier to accept. Clara had sought solace in someone who was just as broken as she was. It hurt to think she couldn't find that comfort in me, but I needed to know more. "Has Clara mentioned anything about Mark in her therapy sessions?" I asked.
Vince nodded.
"According to my sources, she's been open about the affair. She sees it as a mistake, a way to cope with her addiction and loneliness. But she's also struggling with guilt and shame." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "So, what do I do now?" "That's up to you," Vince replied. "You've got the information. It's a matter of what you want to do with it." I thanked Vince and left, my mind racing. I needed to talk to Clara, to confront her about Mark and find out what role he still played in her life. That evening, after dinner, I took a deep breath and brought it up. "Clara, we need to talk about Mark," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. "What about him?" "I know about his past, about the allegations and his involvement with you. I need to understand why you turned to him." Clara sighed, running a hand through her hair. "John, It's complicated. Mark was there when I felt completely alone. He understood what I was going through. But he's not good for you, Clara. He's got his own issues. You deserve better than someone who preys on vulnerability. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I know that now. It was a mistake, one I deeply regret. I've ended things with him. It's over. I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. I need to hear everything, Clara. No more secrets. Over the next hour, Clara poured her heart out. She told me about how she met Mark, how their relationship had started innocently enough with shared lunches and conversations about work. But as her addiction worsened, so did her reliance on him. He became a crutch, someone she could confide in without fear of judgment. I was so lost, John, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't know how to handle everything. Mark seemed like he understood, but I see now that he was just as damaged as I was. It wasn't real. It was just two broken people trying to find comfort. I listened, my heart aching for her. It was painful to hear, but it was also a step towards healing. We were laying everything out in the open, facing it together. By the time we finished, we were both emotionally drained, but there was a sense of relief too. In the following days, Clara and I focused on rebuilding our trust. We set boundaries and made a commitment to communicate openly. It was a slow process, but each small step felt like a victory. I decided to take some time off work to be more present. We spent our days going for walks, cooking meals together, and talking about our future. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt and fear, but we faced them head-on. One afternoon, Clara suggested we visit her parents. It had been a while since we'd seen them, and she felt it was time to reconnect with family. I agreed, thinking it would be a good distraction and a chance to show her parents that we were working through our issues. The visit was surprisingly pleasant. Clara's parents welcomed us warmly, and we spent the day reminiscing about old times and enjoying each other's company. It felt like a glimpse of normalcy, a reminder of what we were fighting for. As we drove back home, Clara reached for my hand. Thank you, John, for everything. I squeezed her hand, feeling a sense of hope. We're going to be okay, Clara. We've got each other, and that's what matters. The next week, I received a call from Vince. John, I've got some final updates for you. Thought you'd want to know. We met at his office, and he handed me another folder. This one contained the last pieces of the puzzle, confirmation that Clara had cut ties with Mark and was fully committed to her recovery. There were also details about her continued progress in therapy and her efforts to stay clean. Looks like you two are on the right track, Vince said, a rare hint of a smile on his face. Thanks, Vince. I don't know what I would have done without your help. Just doing my job, he replied. Take care of her, John, and take care of yourself too. As I left his office, I felt a sense of closure. The investigation had given me the answers I needed, but more importantly, it had brought Clara and me closer together. We still had a long way to go, but we were moving forward, one step at a time. That evening, as Clara and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset, I felt a sense of peace. Our journey wasn't over, but we were stronger now, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, the morning sunlight streamed through the windows as I prepared breakfast, the aroma of coffee filling the kitchen. Clara joined me, her face brightening as she took in the scene. It was becoming our new routine, starting the day together, sharing moments that had once been overshadowed by tension and secrecy. Good morning, she said, wrapping her arms around me from behind. Smells great. Good morning, I replied, turning to kiss her on the forehead. I thought we could use a good start today. We ate in comfortable silence, the kind that spoke of a newfound ease in our relationship. As we finished, Clara looked at me with a serious expression. John, I've been thinking, I want to go to the support group tonight and share my story. I need to confront this, fully and openly. I nodded, feeling a swell of pride. I'll be there with you, every step of the way. The day passed slowly. I went for a run to clear my mind, then spent some time at Sam's garage, helping him with a tricky engine repair. Sam had become my sounding board, always ready with practical advice and a steady presence. How are things with Clara? He asked, wiping grease from his hands. Better, I said, feeling a sense of optimism. She's planning to share her story at the support group tonight. It's a big step, That's great, man. It takes a lot of courage. Just keep supporting her, and you'll both get through this. By the time I got home, Clara was ready to leave. She looked nervous but determined. You sure you're up for this? I asked, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. She nodded. I have to do this, John. For us, for myself. We arrived at the support group meeting, a small room filled with folding chairs and a circle of people who understood our struggles. As we sat down, I felt a mix of apprehension and hope. This was a place where honesty was paramount, where judgment was left at the door. The group leader, a woman named Karen, greeted everyone and began the meeting. After a few people shared their stories, it was Clara's turn. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly, and began to speak. My name is Clara, and I'm an addict, she said, her voice steady but emotional. I've been struggling with prescription drugs for the past 2 years. It started as a way to cope with the stress of my job, but it quickly spiraled out of control. I hurt the people I love, especially John, by keeping it a secret and turning to someone else for comfort. She glanced at me, her eyes filled with remorse. But I'm here to take responsibility and to heal. I want to be honest about my journey and the mistakes I've made. I'm committed to my recovery, and I'm grateful for the support of this group and my partner. The room was silent for a moment, then Karen spoke up. Thank you for sharing, Clara. It takes a lot of courage to be so open. We're here to support you. After the meeting, several people came up to Clara, offering words of encouragement and sharing their own experiences. I watched as she engaged with them, seeing a new strength in her. We drove home in silence, the weight of the evening settling over us. How do you feel? I asked as we pulled into the driveway. Relieved, she said, and scared, but mostly relieved. I'm proud of you, I said, taking her hand. We're going to get through this, Clara, one day at a time. That night, we talked for hours. Clara opened up about her darkest moments, the times she felt completely alone and trapped in her addiction. I shared my fears and frustrations, the sense of helplessness that had consumed me. It was painful, but it was also cathartic. We were finally confronting the truth together. In the days that followed, we continued to attend support group meetings. Clara found solace in the shared experiences of others, and I found strength in being there for her. We also started seeing a couples therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Harris, who helped us navigate the complexities of our relationship and rebuild the trust that had been shattered. Dr. Harris had a gentle yet firm approach. Healing takes time, she said during one of our sessions. It's important to be patient with each other and to recognize that setbacks are part of the process. We took her advice to heart. There were good days and bad days, moments of progress and moments of doubt. But through it all, we held on to each other, determined to make it work. One evening, Clara came home with a surprise. I signed us up for a cooking class, she said, her eyes shining with excitement. I thought it could be something fun we could do together. I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. That sounds great. I'd love that. The cooking class became a weekly highlight. We laughed as we fumbled through recipes, enjoying the simple pleasure of creating something together. It was a reminder of the joy we had once shared and a promise of the future we were building. As the months passed, Clara's recovery continued to progress. She became more involved in her support group, even mentoring new members. I watched her grow stronger and more confident, finding purpose in helping others. It was inspiring to see, and it renewed my own commitment to our journey. Our relationship, though still healing, had taken on a new depth. We were more open with each other, more willing to share our fears and dreams. The scars of the past were still there, but they were no longer the defining feature of our lives. One night, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Clara turned to me with a thoughtful expression. John, I've been thinking a lot about our future. I want to keep moving forward, but I also want to give back. Maybe we could volunteer together, help others who are struggling like we did. I nodded, feeling a swell of pride. I'd love that. Let's do it. As we made plans for our next steps, I felt a sense of fulfillment. We had faced our darkest moments and come out stronger on the other side. Our journey wasn't over, but we were no longer defined by our struggles. We were defined by our resilience, our love, and our commitment to each other. And as long as we had that, I knew we could face anything. Months passed since Clara's brave confession at the support group. Our lives had gradually settled into a new rhythm, one defined by honesty, hard work, and mutual support. But despite the progress, a shadow lingered. The affair with Mark, though ended, still haunted us. I knew the final step in our healing required confronting this ghost directly. One evening, as Clara and I were preparing dinner, I broached the topic. Clara, we've come a long way, but there's still something we need to address. I think we should talk to Mark together. She paused, the knife in her hand hovering above the cutting board. You're right, she said softly. We need closure. I'm just scared of facing him again. We'll do it together, I reassured her. We need to put this behind us for good. The next day, I reached out to Mark. It was awkward and tense, but he agreed to meet us at a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop on the outskirts of town. As the day approached, my nerves were on edge, but I knew this confrontation was necessary for our peace of mind. The coffee shop was almost empty when we arrived. Mark was already there, seated at a corner table, looking uncomfortable. Clara and I walked in hand, presenting a united front. As we sat down, the tension was palpable. Mark broke the silence first. Thank you for meeting with me, he said, his voice subdued. I owe you both an apology. Clara spoke next, her voice steady despite the undercurrent of emotion. Mark, I appreciated your support during my darkest times, but what we did was wrong. It hurt John, and it nearly destroyed us. He nodded, looking genuinely remorseful. I know. I'm deeply sorry for my part in this. I was dealing with my own issues, and I took advantage of our connection. It was selfish and irresponsible. I watched the exchange, my anger slowly melting into something more complex. Seeing Mark's regret, I realized he was just as flawed and human as the rest of us. We all make mistakes, I said, but we need to move on. For Clara and me to heal, we need to let go of the past. Mark nodded again, his expression earnest. I understand. I've started seeing a therapist to work through my own issues. I want to be a better person. The conversation continued for a while, touching on the pain and consequences of their actions, but also on the steps each of us was taking to move forward. By the end, there was a sense of closure, a collective acknowledgement of our mistakes, and a mutual commitment to healing. As we left the coffee shop, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Clara squeezed my hand, and I could see the relief in her eyes too. Thank you, John, she said, for standing by me through all of this. We're in this together, I replied. Always. The next few weeks were transformative. With the confrontation behind us, Clara and I felt a renewed sense of purpose. We threw ourselves into our volunteer work, helping others who were struggling with addiction and relationship issues. It was incredibly fulfilling and brought us even closer together. One Saturday, while volunteering at a local shelter, Clara had an idea. What if we start our own support group? She suggested. There are so many people out there who need help, and we have a unique perspective. I thought about it and realized how far we had come and how much we had to offer. I think that's a great idea. Let's do it. We began the process of setting up the group, working with the shelter to find a space and spreading the word through our networks. The response was overwhelming. People were eager for a place where they could share their stories and find support without judgment. Our first meeting was both nerve-wracking and exhilarating. We had a dozen attendees, each with their own story of struggle and hope. Clara and I shared our journey, emphasizing the importance of honesty, support, and resilience. The room was filled with a sense of camaraderie and mutual understanding. As the weeks passed, our group grew, becoming a beacon of hope for many. We saw people transform, finding strength in their vulnerabilities and building new, healthier relationships. It was a testament to the power of community and the human spirit's capacity for healing. One evening, after a particularly inspiring meeting, Clara and I sat on the porch, reflecting on our journey. Can you believe how far we've come? She asked, leaning against me. It's been a hell of a ride, I admitted, smiling. But it's been worth it. We've turned our pain into something positive. Clara nodded, a contented smile on her face. I'm so grateful for you, John. I couldn't have done this without you. And I couldn't have done it without you, I replied. We've built something amazing together. As we watched the stars, I felt a deep sense of peace. Our relationship had been tested in ways I never imagined, but we had emerged stronger and more united than ever. The shadows of the past had been confronted and dispelled, replaced by a future filled with hope and possibility. Our journey wasn't over, but I knew we could face whatever came next. Together, we had the strength to overcome any obstacle. And as long as we had each other, nothing could break us.